Hello, this is Len Edgerly. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles. If you haven't been here before, this is a podcast about books, Amazon, the Kindle, gadgets, technology, and it's kind of evolving. I've been doing it for 11 years, and I'm trying some experiments with what we talk about here each week, but I've been talking every week for 11 years, and this is I think it's the 581st show. So if you are a regular listener, let's jump right in. We're going to talk about a conference that I was at yesterday and today in nearby Portland. I'm at the cottage at Ocean Park, Maine, and yesterday I attended a workshop by Michael O'Neill, and it was all about podcasting, and I went with an open mind, tried to dial myself back to a beginner's mind, and it worked because I really learned some valuable things about podcasting from Michael, and he agreed to sit down and talk to me after his session, and that'll be the main interview for this episode. Today, there were a number of things that were exciting, and the one that really lifted my head off was a workshop. It was in the last time slot of the day. That I think there were only about 6 of us in the room for Jen Lehner. And she has a Front Row podcast and a consulting business, and she was talking about Alexa flash briefings. Now, you probably are familiar with flash briefings. If you get your news from Alexa from time to time, you can load up NPR, CNN, the other normal sources of content news. But it turns out it's quite easy for anyone to create a flash briefing. And Jen walked us through her way of doing it. When I got back here to the cottage, I did some of what she recommended, and that included coming up with a logo for my Alexa skill for the flash briefing, which I named Morning Journal. But then I realized that there was kind of a streamlined process involving blueprints on Alexa. So I was actually able to submit my flash briefing skill to Amazon about half an hour ago, and it'll take a day or two for it to be reviewed, and at that point it will be available for you to enable as a skill. You just search for Morning Journal if all goes well, and then if you enable that skill, it will become one of your flash briefings, and then you'll simply go to Alexa and say, Alexa, what's new? Or Alexa, give me my flash briefing. And depending on where you have Morning Journal, if it's the only thing you have on the flash briefing, you will hear me talk for about 2 or 3 minutes, and the first episode just introduces the idea. It's going to be a challenge to do it every day, but one of the things that Jen talks about is how that itself became a practice that has really enlarged her life. So let's first, I'm going to play this interview with Jen Lehner, and this was recorded after her presentation at the Agents of Change workshop conference. Why is it such an opportunity now to start creating a flash briefing on Alexa?
Because you're so searchable. So it's, you have to remember that Amazon is this, not only is it the biggest store in the world, but it's sort of a search engine in its own right. And so, if you have whatever your thing is, when you put it on Amazon and people go in to search for a thing, not a flash briefing, they just go to search for whatever, you have a very good opportunity for rising up in that search. Now, more so than later. I mean, once everybody gets on board, it's going to get a lot harder to get found. But right now, it's really, if you do it the right way, it's easy to grow an audience really quickly.
How many flash briefings are there now?
There's only about 9,000 flash briefings.
And the number of podcasts you said is how many?
About 700,000.
So if you were one of the first 9,000 podcasts back in the 90s, how much of an advantage would that have given you?
Gosh, I mean, huge. Or if you were one of the first bloggers or one of the first people on YouTube, gosh, I wish I would have started my podcast in 2005, right? It would have been 2005. And, I still love my podcast, but I'm not getting the traction as quickly with my podcast and the growth as I am with my flash briefing.
Right.
You said that in addition to reaching new people for your podcast and for your business, there was actually sort of a personal development benefit to doing the flash briefings. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, so because people listen to flash briefings daily, that tends to be the way people consume it, you quickly become part of their daily routines. And so I realized that, and I'd chosen the news to talk about, and so for the news, I have to be there every day to record the news. And they also listen early in the morning, which meant I had to get up earlier than I typically do. So I started getting up earlier every morning, and then I was really loving that. And I realized I had this practice, which led to other practices, journaling and exercising every morning. And it's really changed my entire outlook on things, honestly.
Did you get feedback soon enough so that when you started it, there were people that you knew were depending on it, and therefore they're sort of keeping you to the practice?
Yeah, two situations. One was I changed the intro music. This was early on, and a guy messaged me, and he was like, What did you do? Why did you change your music? And I was like floored that anybody was listening, number one, and secondly, that he even cared. But another time, I got a 1-star review. It's the only 1-star review that I've gotten, but this was before I realized I had to do it every day. I was doing it once a week, and I didn't realize, but I realized the woman wrote in her review, she said, it's a good flash briefing, but I hear the same thing every day. And if you don't publish every day, people hear the same thing they heard the day before. And that's when I realized I had to do it every day.
You mentioned a platform. I use Libsyn for my podcast. What's the one that's sort of the Libsyn of flash briefings?
Soundup, and I think their website is soundupnow.com.
Now, did they walk you through the whole procedure of how to upload a flash briefing, or how do we learn how to do that?
They do, actually. If you go to Soundup Now, they have all sorts of great tutorial videos, and I have some as well. If you go to jenlehner.com, to my blog, there's a really, and I published it on Social Media Examiner as well, and it's just a step-by-step of everything you need to do to set it up. It's really easy. It takes like 30 minutes.
It's mind-blowing. This is the most exciting thing I've heard today.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
I'll have links in the show notes to Jan's excellent tutorial about how to set up a flash briefing, and also a link to soundupnow.com, which is a resource for it. As I was working my way through Soundup, it is a very strong platform, and I think for many people it would be helpful. And it may turn out that I'm going to wish that I had set up my flash briefing through Soundup, but I switched to going to Blueprints, which is that's within the Amazon site, and I've had some experience with that before, and also at I think the Remars conference, and I've known that Blueprints was a way that Amazon was trying to invite people who don't have any programming skills at all to create skills. And what I realized when I checked it out tonight was that one of the skills that you can now create is a flash briefing. And in the past, I think these Blueprint skills were only for family and friends, but now you can create something with a blueprint and put it up on the Amazon.store, only in the U.S., unfortunately, at this point. I'll show you how this works. I've got this in creating my morning journal flash briefing. I was able to test it on my Alexa device, and although you can't get it, at Amazon at this point, you can get a feeling for what I'm doing with it. We'll see if we can get her to do that. Alexa, play my flash briefing.
Len, you're up to date so far this evening. Starting again from the beginning. From Len Edgerly's Morning Journal, here is today's insight.
You'll recognize the music.
Hi, thanks for tuning in to my morning journal. I'm actually recording this first episode at night, and I'm looking out from the cottage in Ocean Park, Maine. Pretty big surf tonight, and the waves have been really fun to watch. I was at a conference in Portland today, Agents of Change, and I heard a mind-blowing presentation by Jen Lehner about Alexa flash briefings and how easy they are to make, and how they're becoming a new platform for people who are putting up very brief bits of audio via the Alexa skills. So I'm going to try this out. I like the idea of sending you a little message, kind of a morning journal, thoughts from literature, books I'm reading, technology, insights, just kind of a daily check-in that I hope will find its own form as I experiment with it, and perhaps with feedback from you. I suspect there might be a number of you joining this who are familiar with my Kindle Chronicles weekly podcasts I've done for the last 11 years. So there'll be the same sensibility behind this journal, but we'll perhaps have a chance to explore some different areas as well. I can tell you that I've started some important things in my life here in this room at the cottage at Ocean Park, and in fact, this is the very desk and the very looking out the window at this scene where I started the Kindle Chronicles 11 years ago, and I've been doing it every week since. It's really become kind of a rhythm of my life, and the community that's come around that podcast about books and Amazon and technology has really been a remarkable satisfaction for me. So this, I figured I would create an Alexa flash briefing as quickly as I can, and we'll see where this goes. Thanks for joining me. Hope you have a great day. Now,
that's all for now.
I was playing that on my Echo Show, and it shows the logo that I created. It just says Morning Journal by Len Edgerly, and it's in nice. I've got a nice yellow highlight behind it, and then the screen on the Echo Show says "Welcome to Len's Morning Journal on Alexa." So really quite. It's just so exciting. This is kind of like, the first episode of the podcast when you actually do it, and then you hear it, and my gosh, I can listen to it. And even though I'm the only one that can listen to it at this point, I'm hopeful it's going to pass the review by Amazon, and that in a day or two this will be available to you and to anyone that can download it from the U.S. Alexa store. Pretty exciting stuff. Well, let's switch to the other excitement I had, and this was talking with Michael O'Neill, and he has a Solopreneur podcast. He does lots of interviews, and we talked a little shop about what it takes to do a good interview, and I was conscious of interviewing an interviewer as we talked at the venue after his 3-hour workshop yesterday morning. One thing that you'll hear him say is that he doesn't edit his interviews. And, I spent a lot of time snipping out ums and ahs and tightening things up. So I am going to tie myself to the mast and give you this conversation with an excellent podcaster, Michael O'Neill, without any editing. This will also help me to get to sleep tonight. I've worked a little too much on the flash briefing skill. I've given myself a headache. I've gotten so excited about this project. So I'm going to let this interview rip, and then we'll wrap it up with a few concluding thoughts, and that'll be it for this episode. You talked about a breakup, romantic breakup, and what you learned from it. And I thought that was a pretty intriguing way to get into questions about branding. Let's start talking about that.
Yeah, so I think one of the real challenges for people, at least in my world, are what am I supposed to do with, what's my side hustle, or what business should I do? And I had this, I was lamenting over a breakup years ago, and this person said, take an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, put a line down the middle of it. Left side says pros, right side says cons. And you write down all the pros of that relationship, and then you write down all the cons of that relationship. And first and foremost, you can see, well, were there a lot more cons than pros? That's just at a glance. You go, oh, wait a second. Maybe I was looking at this through a different lens. But the kicker to this one is that you cross off everything you can get in any kind of relationship. Like, so if you have another relationship and it's like, oh, I love how we cuddled and watched Netflix on the couch, then hey, guess what? You can do that in any relationship. It's not just with that person. And so once you cross all those things off,
And these are things on the pro side.
either side.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you can cross off the pros and the cons,
all right.
but what you're left with are the unique things that you're able to mourn, if you will.
They were
right?
specific to that relationship.
They're very specific to that person that
Yeah.
you won't get anywhere else.
Right.
So how I apply this in the branding world is when people are trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives, and they say, look, I'm tired of working 9 to 5, and I want to do something new. I think, okay, what are your unique skill sets? So you start writing down all of the things that you have done in your life. And it could be something as simple as changing a tire. I know how to tend a garden. Or, I can't keep a plant alive personally, but maybe you're great at it, And then look at all of those skills and start subtracting the ones that really have no monetizable future or an audience that's not easy to identify, and cross all those things off. But what you're left with are the few unique things that you go, wait a second, that's interesting. I probably could make that into some kind of business. I've always thought about doing blank with blank, right? So that's how the breakup drill sort of transferred into this, what do I do with my life? That was the idea behind it.
And you're helping people to find something that can become a brand that actually has some hope of having some impact if you start with the things that are unique to you and might connect with other people or a market of some kind.
Yeah, it's important that we be able to answer the question, I help blank do blank. So I help and then sort of insert audience here, do blank. And the other blank is usually their number one problem or something you're trying to help them overcome. Mm-hmm. Very simple few words that can sometimes take months to answer correctly.
Yeah.
It really does require a lot of refining of what you're bringing to the table and how you can help a specific group of people overcome a certain issue. And if that issue happens to be something that's trending or that a lot of people have problems with, then, oftentimes you got a bit of a hit on your hands, which is great.
How do you fill in those blanks for your Solopreneur Hour podcast?
How do I answer that myself? Mm-hmm. I help other unemployable people like myself grow and scale a business they can run in their underwear.
Why is it important to add the underwear?
Well, first of all, it's cheeky, pun intended. Second of all, it's I want people to realize that they can do it from home. They don't need to be in an office, So you can dress any way you want.
Unemployable, that's kind of a provocative word. What are you meaning when you say that the people in your audience are unemployable? Just traditional jobs?
My people are proudly unemployable. So they've learned so much. They know so much about how the other half works that there's no way. So they've done the reading. They've read the books. They've gone to the events. They've gone to the seminars. They see what passive income and multiple income streams and having time freedom looks like. There's no way they can go back to work for that middle manager that doesn't know as much as they do anymore. That they've been ruined. I've ruined a lot of people for 9 to 5 jobs at this point.
Now, your podcast, it's an interview, and it's a long interview. Are they each about an hour-long conversation?
Yeah, at least, yeah. I mean, the show's called the Solopreneur Hour. So. Right.
And
although I've done shorter shows, but
did you have experience interviewing before you were doing the show?
Zero. Yeah, I've been talking to people though.
Yeah.
As a human, so that was helpful. No, but obviously a different skill set, and it was one of those things. It was like there was a bit of Mr. Miyagi happening. I think there was a lot of wax on, wax off.
Well, I don't know who Mr. Miyagi is.
From the Karate Kid? How do you not know the Karate Kid?
I don't know. I missed that.
Jeez.
It's a generational thing.
I guess. So this kid wants to learn how to defend himself, and he befriends this old Asian dude. And he wants to learn how to fight. And Mr. Miyagi, the Asian dude, obviously, makes him wash his car over and over and over again. And he teaches him to wax on a certain way and wax off a certain way, and here's how you wash one thing and here's how you wash another thing. And the kid's getting so frustrated because he's not teaching him anything. And then fast forward, 2 months, all he's been doing is washing this guy's car and cleaning up his yard. And he said, "You haven't taught me anything." And then Mr. Miyagi says, "Wax on," and he tries to punch him, and Daniel goes, because it's exactly how he learned. So he does the motion that he'd been teaching him to wax on. And then he said, "Wax off," and all of a sudden he defends the other side. And then he goes through this combination, and Daniel had been learning all of these moves all along, and he didn't realize that.
Huh.
So it was a great scene when he discovers that he was actually being trained in this way.
So does that apply to what you learned about just talking to people, that when you were doing interviews, all of a sudden you knew some of these moves?
Yeah,
intuitively?
It was one of those things where I get on the microphone. Did you ever see The Bourne Identity? Have you seen
Matt
a
Damon.
movie in your life?
Old Yeller? No. All right, I have heard of that movie, though. That's Matt Damon.
Yeah, and Matt Damon is... we don't know anything about him. He was floating in the sea. He had a couple of bullets in his back. We don't know where he is. He doesn't remember who he was or what was going on. And he's effectively homeless in Poland, and he's sleeping on a park bench. And these cops prod him, and he doesn't remember his name. He doesn't remember where he came from. He doesn't remember anything. And they prod him, and they say, "Hey, you got to get up, get up, get up." And he says, in fluent Polish, "I'm just trying to sleep. I'm really tired." And then you see him go, "How do I know Polish?" Like he has no idea how he knows the language. And then they kind of try to subdue him, and in 3 seconds, they're both on the ground, and he's holding the gun, and he has no idea how he did that.
Wow.
And so I remember being on like a couple of my early interviews and sort of going through this conversation, this narrative, going, how do I know how to even do this? And I think it was just growing up with Howard Stern and Oprah and some of these legendary, and really paying attention to the art of it, but not realizing I was paying attention to it. It was like this. It was this thing where I only realized it after, just like Daniel San and Jason Bourne.
Yeah.
Only realized it after it happened. I was like, I don't know. I know how to do that, because in fact, I had to. I was producing another show, and the guy who ran the show couldn't make it. He was climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, and he was totally off the grid. We had just enough shows, but this was like one more day that we thought he'd be back, but he wasn't. I said, "Man, we need a show." And so I just decided to jump on and do a 45-minute show on how to grow your business using social media. And I remember hitting record and just banging out this show in 45 minutes and hitting stop and going, that was easy. And then a bunch of people emailed and said, you should do that. That should be a thing you do. It was very natural and very comfortable for me to do.
Were you interviewing somebody for that show?
No, I was interviewing. It was just me talking.
Yeah.
But I was doing live reads and ad reads and things like that, and just kind of going, how do I know how to even do this? But yeah, it ended up being a very natural fit for me, just because I think I'd been studying stand-up comedy and interviewers and things for so long that I kind of innately knew how to do it.
Well, when you started the Solopreneur Hour podcast, why did you think that interviews were going to be the best way to help people?
I didn't.
No.
Selfishly, I just wanted to talk to cool people that did cool things.
They give you a chance to meet and talk to people that you wanted to talk to.
I just thought it was going to be interesting. And honestly, I think marketing has taught us that every show needs it's got to be actionable and give someone value. But I realized very early on, guess what? Entertainment can be value. People sometimes just want to be entertained. And so that was the core concept of the show. So let me just do a show that, it's my own version of the Tonight Show, that has no other agenda other than just to give a person to a place to, it's kind of a variety show. I want a vehicle for them to be able to share their genius with everybody.
One thing I've heard other people, I think Howard Stern in his book, Howard Stern Comes Again, which I just finished, fabulous book.
I haven't read it yet. Is it amazing?
Well, it's transcripts of all these interviews, like Letterman and Chris Rock, and it's sort of Howard Stern 2.0. It's the new post-therapy Howard,
right.
And but he said that sometimes when he's doing an interview, he feels, when it's going well, he feels so connected to the person. That there's this moment where he thinks, I've found this soulmate and we're going to be friends forever. And it very seldom ever happens. But do you have that sort of a disconnect sometimes when you're at a microphone with somebody, you've done your research, you're sort of grokking the guy or person, but then you're back in the real world and you're just almost like strangers again. Is that?
That has happened to me 100 times. Yeah, it's almost time travel is the wrong word. It's the best way I can describe it is it's like the surgeon doesn't know that you're a real estate agent. He just needs to fix your heart or your spleen. He doesn't. And nor does he care. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just not part of what he's doing. When I'm inside an interview, I'm not concerned, like, I'm not hearing the interview. Because people are like, oh, God, you must learn so much. I'm like, I don't even hear. I'm focused so much on the narrative for the audience and what is being delivered to them that I'm not consuming the information at all. I'm not sort of learning as I go. If I need to learn, I go back and listen to the episode, which I've done a few times. But when I do that, it's as if that's not me, doing the show. It is, and that's only happened pretty rarely. But I've absolutely been like, oh my God, I'm locked. We're going to be buds forever. And then a year later, I'll run into him at a conference, and they'll be like, "Oh, I had such a good time on your show." I'm like, "You were on my show?" Like, it's just that. It's this weird, it's this weird transference.
Yeah.
Well,
when you're not sort of listening to the content of it, what are you listening? What's the focus?
I mean, I am, but I'm not absorbing.
Okay.
I'm listening in a way that serves it serves a narrative, and I'm following up on. I'm thinking 3 steps ahead of almost like a lawyer does when they lead someone down. Like I have an outcome sometimes in my head of what the kind of content I'd like to deliver to my audience, and so I'm listening, and I'm active listening in a way that I can then sort of direct that content in this specific narrative, but I'm not listening to learn.
Right.
Because if you listen to learn, you're out of it. That's a passive role, and this is an active engagement that we're in.
Because you're sort of shaping the narrative as
right.
It's happening.
That's right, and it's live and it's active and it's. I'm sure you've done this where you've been interviewing somebody, maybe they're telling a story or something, and you blip onto a website or something, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I'm totally lost.
Yeah.
And you're just in it. It's quick. It's like you're skydiving, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, I'm way off course. All of a sudden, I don't know where I went just because it was a momentary. So there's a hyper focus, and I discovered for myself, a lot of people I know batch multiple shows a day. They'll do 8 shows in a day. I've done them before where I've had 3 shows in a day and not been able to even function as a human after the 3rd show. I mean, at all. I'm not able to communicate with humans very well. 2 gets about to my edge. Mm-hmm. But there's a tremendous amount of brain power that it's required to keep it entertaining and informative and do all the things that we try to do when we're interviewing people. That my brain didn't have capacity for 3. I realized, I was like, whoo, 3 is too much for my brain to do. So I can't, I have to, I've got to cater to that and be cognizant of that as I'm doing the show.
Yeah, you got to know your limits.
You can't wear my brain out.
Yeah. It's like a really rich food that you can't have too much of it.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. I think that it's, if you're doing it properly, it requires a tremendous amount of brain power, and it's not. I bet you could ask Howard that. It's difficult to interview and learn. You can pick up snippets and go, "Ooh, I want to know more about that. That sounds interesting." But if you really want to dig into the content, you got to go back and listen to it.
Oh yeah, sometimes I'll listen to an interview I did, and it'll be like I didn't hear it. I said, "Wow, that's fascinating." And
that's exactly right. Wow, that's interesting. I never heard that before. You're like, you did.
Yeah, it was me asking.
Yeah,
the
you're
question.
asking the question. Yeah, it's an interesting cognitive disconnect a little bit.
The other thing that happens to me sometimes is I'll have a conversation. I usually do a lot of taping by Skype, and I'll get off and I'll think, that sucked. It was just like, and I'll go talk to my wife and I'll say, oh, I just had the worst conversation. We didn't connect. It was nothing about it. And she will say, you often say that after some of your best interviews. You have no clue at this point whether that was a good interview. You probably won't know until you listen to it. And sometimes the reverse. I think, man, I nailed that. And then I'll listen to it and it's just kind of flat.
Do you listen to all your shows?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I listen. See, I edit heavily. I cut out ums and ahs, and
you do.
So when I do, I'm sort of living
the
interview. Yeah, I know. I like your way of doing it better.
Easy, in and out.
Record and go.
Well, and one of the things you can do is.
But do you not listen to your shows?
No, I've
Never?
listened to 2 out of 800.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I should listen to more because there's some really good stuff in there. One thing you can do if you have a lot of ums and ahs and just take a sticky note and just write the word on it and put it right in the middle of your monitor as you're doing the show.
Well, sometimes guests, though. I've had guests that I can't listen to them because there's so many ums and ahs. But
yeah, you can tell them.
Yeah.
You're umming a lot. I'm a big Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and I was trying to listen to Mike Tomlin, who's their coach, do a press conference the other day. I mean, if he said 300 ums in that press conference, I don't know if that would have been the understatement of the year. It was every other word. I said, can someone please just tell him how much umming he's doing? It's crazy.
Put a Post-it up for him.
16 years he's been doing this.
Yeah.
Someone just write, stop saying put it on the pedestal.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, the other thing you talked about in your session was, it was about podcasting, and the brands thing was integral to what I learned out of it. But the idea of someone who comes to you and says, I've got an idea for a podcast, and I want your help with a podcast. When you're sort of making your first impression of someone or someone's idea, what are you looking for? How soon do you know when somebody starts saying, I've got an idea for a podcast, that you're going to need to kind of guide them to do a blog post or something, or you sense this could really work? I mean,
seconds.
And what
seconds.
How do you know?
That's experience, mostly. Just knowing the landscape of shows. Yeah. And sometimes I'll hear them and go, oh, there's no way, or that's been done 100 times. We have to be more specific than that. Yeah. We're going to do a show about inspiring entrepreneurs. I'm like, that and a quarter gets you a gumball. Good for you, but so what? Yeah. Next you're going to tell me you want to travel for a living and blog about food. Okay. So it's like we got to be a little more specific. But sometimes when they'll tell me, so I've been thinking about doing a show, I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. That sounds like a great show. And they won't realize how good it is. And someone will talk them out of it and go in a different direction. I go, no, that show was the show. That was the one that was going to work. So I think just being around it for so many years, I have a general sense of that.
Is it the passion that you can hear somebody talking about something they really love?
No, I'm pretty digital about, and I'll tell you too if it sucks. I'll tell you it sucks. But it's, I'm trying to think as you ask this, is there a way to just tell I mean, I think you have to be able to answer that. I help blank
Right.
do blank. That's important.
Yeah.
I think you have to recognize that people have to be passionate about the subject somewhere, either on a message board or on a social media group,
Right.
Facebook group, whatever. There has to be enough people talking about that thing. And there has to be enough, I don't want to say controversy, that's the wrong word, but there's got to be enough interest overall in that subject for
Some heat.
people to, a little heat is the right word. Yeah.
Now, there's a statistic about the number of podcasts that have no more than 7 episodes.
That's the
by far
huge majority, yeah.
Why do most people abandon a podcast that they've started?
It's called pod fade,
Yeah.
and it's challenging. People, I think, get into it because everybody has a podcast. Everyone's supposed to have a podcast now, so you just do it. Even as you're getting into it, and you know, I mean, you've been doing this for 11 years. It's a shiz ton of work. It's a lot of work, especially if you're editing out ums and ahs.
Yeah. My work just got easier listening to you.
I know, but I'm like, I just said, sorry about that, editor. But everyone does it, and then at some point they realize that it's like picking up a guitar and now playing in front of people.
Yeah.
And going, but you can't just, you have to practice and be good at it for people to care at all. So the same thing that drew them to it, which is that it's really easy and that it's a low barrier of entry, is the same reason why most podcasts are complete crap. 96%, 97% are terrible. Yeah. Because it's a talent. It's something that people have to have a talent for, and so not everybody has that talent yet. You can develop it, but this goes back to what we said earlier. A lot of people were like, was your first show totally terrible and blah, blah. I was like, no, not really. It was pretty good, actually. It was not that dissimilar than what I'm doing now. That is not usually the case. I came from a 15-year career of playing music professionally. I'd been around music and stages for a long time. My mom was in advertising and in radio. I grew up truly listening to Howard and stand-up comedy on the technical side. I was doing, that's interesting how he did that, and then the crowd responded this way, and then he took them through this. I recognized that stuff years and years and years ago. So by the time I got here, I probably had more base knowledge of communicating as a broadcaster than most. So it wasn't, I can listen back now and go, I probably could have done this. I sound a little hungry in this part, whatever. But for the most part, I think the reason why the show latched on is because it was really the first long-form interview show for entrepreneurs. It didn't exist. So I think, and isn't as duplicatable because of it. So when people go out and go, I'm going to do these cool long, I'm like, no, you're not. They can try, but people realize pretty quickly that they're not that interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Their audience anyway. And the audience, people vote with their subscriptions.
You said a thing that interested me, kind of comparing some of the standard podcasters, Leo Laporte, maybe Leo's been on a long time, and there's a sort of a Leo Laporte way of doing a podcast.
Yeah.
And how has it changed? When you think of podcasts now that are more at the cutting edge and they're more defining the way podcasts are going to look like in the future, what are they doing that some of those older shows haven't figured out how to do yet?
I think that many of the older podcasts are based on a radio narrative and a complete methodology of segments and bumpers and they are essentially radio shows that have been ported to podcasting, whereas new versions of podcasting are much looser, much more podcast specific, and people that get the medium maybe a little more. There's something I call integration, which is the integration of the digital to podcast world. Because if you're a podcaster, you also probably know a lot about social media. You maybe have a YouTube channel, maybe you have a Facebook group, something like that. So to be able to weave those together is a fairly critical part of having a successful show, whereas a traditional radio personality has never had to do any of that stuff. There's always been a production staff. There's always been somebody editing. There's always been, the talent is disconnected from the body of the show. Yeah. And now it's totally integrated. So for better or for worse, I mean, a lot of the greatest, most well-produced shows are your NPR and your, they've got 12-person production teams working on these shows, and, especially the true crime shows, which have these amazing stories that are being told with interstitials and interviews and things like that. A normal podcaster can't do that. They just don't have the chops to do that. So that's what makes those shows great, because they are extensions of a very high-end level of entertainment that came from professionals that have been trained in this for many years. So that's great, but equalizing that playing field is the fact that Joe Bob from the farm can do a show about horses with his one microphone and GarageBand and get every bit as many views, or listens rather, as the well-produced shows, and form an amazing audience and be just as successful. That's what makes it cool. So I think maybe the landscape has changed for some of the people that came from radio and said, we should take our radio show and make it a podcast. And Leo came from radio. Adam Carolla came from radio, but has done a great job adapting to the new platform. But the Adam Carolla show is effectively a radio. It's a 3-hour radio show he does 5 days a week. I mean, that's what it is. But his other auxiliary shows, like CarCast and the one he does about building, those are like true podcasts. Those are in the current version of what a podcast is, But then you look at companies like Podcast One, who's where Adam is being hosted. They came from Westwood One. They're
it's a straight
radio.
line.
They're radio people, So yeah, that's the deal.
One thing I've, so many, was it 80% of podcasts are coming from iTunes or being played on a phone, and often you've got the earbuds in your ear, you're hearing it. It just seems like a more intimate way to listen than a radio, and that's part of the essence of the podcast platform. Is it's almost like you're one-to-one with somebody in bed, or you're in a very intimate setting.
You're on their treadmill with them, you're walking their dog, you're on a walk. I mean, absolutely, it is the thing that makes podcasting what it is the intimacy of it. And it feels totally different than a radio show.
Exactly.
I mean, you feel a completely different connection with that person. And I think it's because, and again, Howard did this on the radio a little bit more, but very transparent about their lives. And I mean, people know a lot about me that listen to my show. I've had so many occasions that you've seen this, right, where people come up to you and they feel like they know you because they've been listening to you for years. You don't know anything about them, So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that there's almost a permission to be more, like when my mother passed a month ago, I do the show every week no matter what. The show must go on. So I talked about her, and I played an interview I did with her 8 years ago, and I put her picture on the show. So I turned that episode of the show into an appreciation of my mother.
Absolutely.
And people loved it. I mean, it was they're moved, and I talked about her before, and so... and I think
everyone has to go through with that.
Well, yeah, and so you think you've started a show about entrepreneurs, Kindle, whatever, but I think that the reason people stay listening is they want to hear you or they want to hear me, and that doesn't mean I'm just going to pick up the microphone and talk about myself in a kind of self-absorbed way. There's this kind of fine line between, meeting the promise of the content and letting yourself come fully through all the ways the medium can connect you with another person.
So that piece of it is so critical. It's really what makes podcasting what it is.
Yeah.
And even though it's a bit of a buzzword, transparency, is the thing. The more people realize that you're mostly like them,
yeah,
and you just happen to have a skill set, it's why people listen. The other part is there's a lot of people that get intimidated by other people being in a certain space. So let's say you're a really good financial planner or something like that. And you say, well, God, there's so many financial planners out there. Well, they're not you. You're going to speak to people in a way, just like you go to the dentist you like, you go to the doctor you like, you go to the guy who washes your car because he does a certain thing a certain way. It's the same thing with podcasting. It's the same thing with coaching. It's the same thing with consulting. People resonate. Just because someone else has a show about blank doesn't mean other people aren't going to like your show.
Right, right.
So you don't have to worry about that. It's one thing if it's like mega saturated, which there are some industries that are, but even then, if you're good at other things, I know people that they're okay podcasters, but they're phenomenal on Instagram or on YouTube, and they just brought that audience over and they have a grand old time on their podcast, and it's great. And I also know people that do podcasts in the craziest niches you can imagine, and they still do really well.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, I love it as a medium. I love it that if you have a specific interest, there's probably other people that have that same interest. And you don't need hundreds of thousands. You can get away with a couple hundred and have a really fun time doing a show.
Let's finish up with some of the resources that you make available to people. You've got an interviewing course, and then how else can people get the benefit of your experience online?
Yeah, the course is called The Art of the Interview, and it's the culmination of a lot of the things we've spoken about, just a lifetime of gathering knowledge on how to properly interview people. We'll talk about how to plug people after this. And that's artoftheinterview.co. And then the podcast it's called the Solopreneur Hour. So it's on iTunes and Spotify and all the things, or solohour.com, because nobody can spell preneur in America.
And then you also do coaching sessions. People can book you to coach.
Yeah, I help people launch podcasts. I help people build their businesses. And often I'm helping people figure out what they want to do, whether they're they're creating or scaling a business, again, that they can do in their underwear.
That's an image I will not forget.
Good.
Thanks a lot for talking with me, Michael. It's been a pleasure.
It's been super fun. Thanks for having me.
That's Michael O'Neill. One thing which he taught me that I'm going to follow up on is the difference between a dynamic and a condenser microphone. And he said if you have a Blue Yeti microphone, it's a good doorstop just because it's a condenser microphone. And I've got two Blue Yetis. So I've always thought there's something not quite as professional to the sound of the show as the others that I listen to. And I think the answer is going to be getting a dynamic microphone. So thanks to Michael for that. The conference, Agents of Change, the impresario of it is Rich Brooks, who has new Flyte Media in Portland, and he assembles a really terrific cast of presenters and workshop leaders. More than one person was standing there on the stage at the University of Southern Maine saying, I've never been this far northeast in my life, and boy, I can't wait to have a lobster. So kind of good local promotion of gathering such a talented group of people together. And there are 300 or 400 people in the audience, and Otto's Pizza provided free pizza, and there was really just top-notch conference. I think this is the 8th year in a row that he's done it, and I've probably attended all 5 of them. I think this is the best one that Rich Brooks and his team have done. So very much a worthwhile trip here to Portland, and mornings here at the cottage, which isn't heated. We're a little chilly, down to 41 when I woke up, but then it's warmed up nicely, and it's turned out to be terrific. I'll head back to Cambridge tomorrow, and Darlene has, with some help, unloaded all of the furniture that's been in storage for over a year now that the house is ready after the remodel. My guest next week is going to be Mike Shatzkin, who was at the Digital Book World Conference that I wasn't able to attend a week or so ago, and he gave a terrific presentation that we heard about from David Peach, so I'm looking forward to talking to Mike about that. And he, of course, blogs at the Idea blog, and he's been a long-time observer of the publishing world and always has very smart insights on Amazon's role and the whole landscape. So I'll hope you'll tune into that next week. And check your Alexa skills for Morning Journal. Maybe sometime midweek you might be able to add that to your daily flash briefings if you'd like to give it a try. This is Len Edgerly in Ocean Park, Maine for the Kindle Chronicles. Thanks a lot for listening. Have a great day. Bye.